Hi, welcome back to another episode of the Unplanned podcast by Jyla. I am not Jyla, I'm Jess, but Jyla is my business name. This podcast series, which is now exclusively just a YouTube thing, I don't really upload audio stuff anymore. It's going to be a ramble. I'm not very concise. That's unfortunately just my speaking style. So if you want to grab a hot drink, sit down and chill with me as we discuss some difficult business topics that can hold us back, that's what I'm here for. So get settled. It can be a long episode because I do talk a lot, but hopefully you find this episode helpful. We are talking about overthinking today, overcomplicating, overwhelm, all of the over things that we struggle with. Alright, so this podcast episode is going to be about overthinking. It's a big topic. There's a lot of parts to overthinking and different reasons for it. I did put out a little poll on Instagram asking if anyone else struggles with overthinking and overcomplicating things. And unsurprisingly, I had a few people say that they did struggle with it because I think it's a very, very common struggle. I think a lot of us do struggle with overcomplicating and perfectionism because it's just a very human fear of failing, of like not doing your best. And I guess the reason why I wanted to go into this topic for this episode is because it's a very personal struggle for me, because that's the reason why I haven't been posting more podcast episodes, because let me adjust this. I do love these podcast episodes. It's really dear to my heart to have this business chatty style of podcast episode because I really want to bring to light some topics that we all struggle with and just to have a safe space for us to chat about it and for me to share my experiences, because I think when you're looking at creatives or you're just looking at other people, it's hard to know what they're going through, their personal struggle, and it's not like they're trying to hide it, but it's really hard to see the entire picture. And so this podcast, the whole point is just to bring to light my struggles as well, so you feel a little bit less alone, and also to kind of show you that it's an ongoing struggle, because this is the 15th episode of this podcast and I'm still struggling with it because it's so scary every time. It's such a big, scary task for me because it's so important to me, and that's something I want to highlight. Just because there's a little bit of discomfort there doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing or it's a bad sign. Sometimes it could mean it's a very good sign that you're onto something big and it's really important to you, and so you're scared of it because you're putting a lot of pressure on yourself. So I have my notes here. I just wrote some random notes here, but just some, I guess, background context again, reintroducing myself for this podcast episode, because this is relevant to the topic, I promise. I started off wanting to do very concise kind of episodes talking about a particular topic. And so I had a very clear idea of how I wanted to do it, but I struggled to do it because I quickly realized that I wasn't the sort of person that was concise, that could keep things, very short. And I am a rambler. I tend to be a rambler. I don't have very clear, thinking patterns. And so by letting myself just ramble and talk free flow, just not have a script, because when I first started doing these episodes, I had a script, and that was because I was a perfectionist and I was overthinking it, and I was just so terrified that if I started recording, I wouldn't know what to say, I wouldn't cover all the things I wanted to say. And so because of that fear and that pressure and that, need to be perfect, I would write a word for word script and try to follow that with the podcast episodes. And were they good? Maybe they could have been good. Maybe people prefer it, but it didn't feel comfortable for me. And for me, when it comes to business or creating with content and everything like that, it's really important for me that it's sustainable and it's fun, because if I dread doing it every time, I'm less likely to do it. And so I'm sharing the kind of evolution of this podcast to kind of explain where I'm up to now, because again, 15 episodes in, you'd think that I'd have it figured out by now, but I really don't. And I still find it difficult. I'm still changing locations. I don't have a set place for it. Maybe I do now, but I'm still figuring things out. This setup right here is just kind of good enough. And that's what I wanted to focus on. I do have some points and tips that I feel like have worked for me, but the whole essence of this podcast now is just, we're just sitting down, we're just chatting, we're just having a casual little chat. Let's pretend we're at a cafe and we're just talking about this one particular topic. And so yes, it'll be rambly. I'm not very concise, and I will, go off track quite a lot. But I want it to feel like a very one-on-one conversation where I'm just sharing my thoughts. So I don't have a script. And the thought of that used to terrify me. And it took me years to get to this point where I felt comfortable just sitting in front of the camera and just talking. And that's kind of another point I wanted to emphasize, that it gets easier with more experience over time, but the feeling never really goes away. So I put off recording a podcast episode for the Unplanned podcast for months, because I'm still terrified and because I'm still overthinking it, and every episode is still, it still feels like a lot of pressure, because again, this is my baby, this is my big project. And so because it is so important to me, I am putting it off because I just have such big lofty goals for it. And that's probably the first root issue. When you put too much pressure on yourself to do something, regardless of whether or not it is for business or not, but when you set the bar too high, it can be too intimidating to even start. And therein lies your problem, because the whole point is you want to start, you want to make progress, because the only way you're going to get better is by making progress, is by taking those baby steps. So my first tip, I'm going out of order already from my notes, but my first tip is to break it down into tiny steps. It is great to have big goals, to have those big lofty goals, but if you really want to get started, if you really want to make progress, you have to just take the first step. And again, that's big coming from me because I put this off for I don't know how long. I want to say a whole year. Let's just assume it's been a year. I have a very bad sense of time, but in that whole year, I've been thinking about this podcast. I've been writing it down as a goal to record something for this podcast, and I've been putting it off. And literally only in the past 2 weeks have I really taken proper steps towards making this happen. The 15th episode. And I feel like that's really important to say, because you typically think of this struggle only in the beginning of your journey, but for me, in my experience, it's an ongoing thing. I'm constantly trying to manage my fear of failure, my ongoing perfectionism, and it's really an ongoing thing, and it does get easier. I can say it really does get easier, but we just learn to get better at managing ourselves and getting out of our own way. But don't wait for the feeling to just go away magically. In my experience, it has not gone away. It's still difficult, but it gets easier because you learn from experience. So my first tip is to break down whatever big goal you have. Again, this is a very, very big topic, and I feel like I'm covering a lot of things within one topic, but I just wanted to start with something easy that's been on my mind that I'm struggling with currently. So the first step for me with recording this was to choose a topic. I had a whole list of topics, so it wasn't like I was unprepared or anything. I wasn't committing to choosing a particular topic. So as soon as I committed to one particular topic, the next step was then to write notes on that topic. What are my thoughts around this topic? And then from there, I chose a date to record. And then it just kind of snowballed. But the first step was to just commit to the first thing, rather than just focusing on this big goal of I want to record an episode. Because it's what are the small steps in between to get to that big goal? So again, it's amazing to have a big lofty goal, but only thinking about the goal, only thinking about that big goal is not going to get you there. You really need to break it down into the day-to-day reality of what do I need to do today? What's one thing I can do today to get me closer to that goal? And that was a question I asked myself every single day in the beginning of my business journey, because when I had no videos on YouTube, when I had no patrons, I hadn't launched anything yet, when I barely had a shop and I absolutely had zero sales, I was struggling a lot with that impatience and the feeling of my goals felt so far away. And so I just kept asking myself to keep myself grounded, but also to keep myself focused. What is the one thing I can do right now? What is the one thing I can do today to get me closer to that one big goal? And what it did was it took my focus away from the long term and brought it back to the present, right now. And I feel like that's one of the issues of kind of overthinking, because we see the outcome very clearly. But for me, I know personally, my struggle is from getting to the here to the future, because I'm a big long-term thinker. I love making those big goals, but where I struggle is definitely in the little details. I know people that are very, very good at working with the little details, but for me, I do struggle with that. And so that's why I do plan so much and break everything down. But that's also why I'm getting ahead of myself. But that's also why I am really big on deadlines and goals. And that is my second tip. Give yourself a deadline. It kind of leads into my first tip, which I wrote down, learn from experience, because if you know yourself well enough, and you really have to be honest with yourself if you want to achieve goals, if you really want to get things done, you have to be honest with yourself, and you have to know your own limitations, and you have to know where you go wrong and where you fall short. So if you know you give yourself too much time and you just waste that time, then you really need to cut that down. And so for me, I never remember the names of the laws. I want to say it's maybe Parkinson's law, but there is a law that says work expands to fill the time allocated. Basically, I'm paraphrasing, but if you give yourself 2 weeks to complete a task, it'll take you 2 weeks to complete a task. If you give yourself 5 days instead, you will probably find a way to complete it within 5 days. And we know that from experience with completing schoolwork. But the takeaway is, if you give yourself too much time to do a task, you will find ways to procrastinate and delay until the very last moment to get it done. If you're anything like me, that is. And so knowing that about myself, that if I give myself too much time, I will just overthink, I will delay, I will procrastinate, I will find ways to fill that time in ways that makes me feel like I'm being busy, but I'm not actually. So planning can be a form of procrastination. It is a form of self-sabotage, because we can plan all we want, but there gets to a point where there's only so much planning you can do that it's not helping anymore, and you just need to take action. And so I think a lot of us get caught in this planning stage because it still feels like we're being busy. It still feels like we're making progress, but really you're just going in circles, because like, at what point is it good enough and you're ready to just start? Obviously there are exceptions, and planning is still very good because I'm obsessed with planning, but we have to know where we take it too far sometimes. And I think I definitely have a tendency to overplan out of fear. So if you know that about yourself, that means you need to know when to cut yourself off and be like, that's enough planning. So I did a page of planning, this page, and I said that's enough. Because if I let myself have another week to plan for this episode, I will take a whole week. Does that mean I plan every single day? No, but maybe I do, and I write down extra little notes. But am I ready enough? Is it good enough to just get started? And clearly, because I'm talking a lot about it, but that's one of the reasons why people do procrastinate and delay and overthink, because we want to keep planning to make sure like we're prepared for everything. We want to be super prepared. And so this might be a reason why you overplan, overcomplicate, overthink things, because you want to be as prepared as possible for everything. But if you know that about yourself, you need to be realistic and only give yourself a certain amount of time. Give yourself a deadline. How long do you realistically want to work on this? And that's just a guess at first, but again, it ties into my first tip of like, learn from experience. Because over time, you will figure out your routines, your patterns. You know that you really only need a month to work on this. You know you only need 2 days, so give yourself 2 days. You just will learn eventually to manage yourself a little bit better. And yeah, I'm powering through these tips, but my fourth tip is to give yourself permission to fail. Just let it be good enough, and also just embrace the fact that it might not work, and that's okay. Like, really just let yourself experience how you will feel if you attempt it and it fails. Because I think that's another big reason why we overcomplicate and we overthink, because we are afraid of failing. And to share, I've got the story responses here on my computer, but Amy says, absolutely, catastrophizing, that sounds wrong. Catastrophizing / shame spirals are a daily / weekly stressor for me. And then Jen's Pen says, yes, my mind warps to the pros and cons to every possibility, and I can't prioritize. And then Christy from Full Bloom & Co says, oh my God, yes, all the time, to the point of giving up because it's just too hard. And I love that she said in brackets, I made it hard. Because that's exactly my point. So my question was, do you struggle with overthinking? And there's a pattern here because it's a cycle. It becomes so stressful that you overthink and then you get overwhelmed from your overthinking and stressed from it, and then you just avoid it completely. And then, as Amy said, it becomes a shame spiral, and that is not a good thing. That is not what we want to do. So by putting it off, we're actually making it harder for ourselves. Isn't that crazy? That's why it's a form of self-sabotage. And again, I'm coming from a place of love because I struggle with this personally. So I'm here with you, but I want to kind of share how I've managed it, because again, after how many years now? 6 years? I still struggle with it. As much content as I make, I still struggle with it, but it gets easier. And I just want to share one more from Stacey. Plain and Stacey literally will avoid stuff because I overthink it and am afraid I'll fail at it, so I just don't do it. There is the theme. We get so stressed. Well, no, it starts off as we have an idea or something that we want to do. Then we start overcomplicating it and overthinking it to the point that it stresses us out and we get so overwhelmed that we just don't do it. That is not the ideal outcome at all. And so again, there could be multiple reasons why these people on Instagram said that they struggle, because one, it could be a fear of failure. Two, it could be a perfectionism thing. You feel like you're never prepared enough, so you just spend forever planning it, working on it, and just never getting around to actually doing it. Whatever your reason is, I'm here to give you some tips to help you break out of this cycle. Again, this is not something that's just going to be instantly fixed in the 30 minutes that you watch this episode. It's going to be an ongoing life struggle, but my goal is to help equip you with some strategies to make it a little bit easier and for you to learn from your experience, to stop being trapped in these cycles and doing the same thing over and over and over, because I really want you to set goals and be able to achieve them if they are important to you. But I know I've skimmed through my last 4 tips, but my 5th tip that I've written down is to think of your future self. This is a big one that helps me break out of my cycle. And what I mean by that is, instead of getting overwhelmed with how you feel currently, how you feel presently, the stress, the overwhelm, and the avoiding it because you're scared, think of how you will feel once it's done. Once you have achieved what it is you have set yourself to do, and I'm not talking like a really big goal, let's say like a big exercise goal, not at the end of that, but at the end of that one task that you are avoiding. So, for example, if I, was struggling with this episode and I just gave myself the task of committing to a topic, I actually put off that task for a week. I think just sitting down and looking at my list of topics and choosing a topic. That for me was a struggle. I struggled to even choose a topic because that felt scary. When I focus on how I will feel when I choose that topic, I felt relief, because it meant I could move on. It meant I actually made real, tangible progress. I took a real step towards the goal. Hang on to that relief, that feeling of relief, or how you will feel when you know that you will have achieved this task, this one small task, knowing that you've made that step, and focus on that feeling. Because when we get trapped in that shame spiral, we need to break out of that cycle. We need to do something different to get us out of there. And a big part of that is just getting us out of our own head. I didn't write down this tip, but this might work for you as well, to kind of hold yourself accountable if you need. Find someone where you bounce ideas off each other and you set yourselves deadlines. So, in a week's time, you have to check in and share what you've done. Sometimes that helps for people. For me, that's actually quite stressful, so it doesn't work for me. And it doesn't address the root issue for me, because I know it's coming from deep within me. So I need to, heal whatever it is that is holding me back from accomplishing things because I'm too scared. So accountability could work for some people, but it's not a necessary thing, but it could help having like an accountability buddy, because a big part of this is momentum. For me, I struggle with momentum a lot, and so being able to take that first step, the big first step, it's not even big, it's a tiny first step, that helps so much. So for me, if I can just take that first step, everything tends to snowball from there. But for me, the struggle is mostly taking that first step. And so a lot of these things is kind of concerned with that part of the process. For a lot of people, it could be the end. So maybe you've worked on this YouTube video, you've worked on this website, but you struggle with publishing it. Like you've done the work, you just can't put it out there. That's a different topic that we can cover in a different episode. But this is kind of focusing on, doing the first steps in order to achieve your goal, because based on your answers from Instagram, a lot of you are stuck in the thinking process, in the planning process, so much that it gets you overwhelmed and you just avoid doing it completely. And so the key takeaway from this is to figure out why exactly you're avoiding the task. Understanding that's, just one step, and knowing your limits, knowing exactly what helps you break out of that cycle. It's really important that you learn from experience too, because if you know that you do this every single time, you don't want to try again and hope that something different happens if you know that this is your cycle. You know that this is what you do every single time. And I know it's easier said than done. Again, this is an ongoing struggle. We just got to learn ways to manage ourselves better. But again, give yourself a deadline, break it down into the tiniest little steps, like work around what works for you. For me, the main thing that helps me break out of that overthinking cycle is to think of my future self. To think of how I feel once I have completed that task, because instantly I get pulled out of that overwhelm and into that feeling of like calm, like I can do this. I want to feel like that once that's done. And that's what motivates me to actually do that task. It's kind of like, it's not really, but this is the example that came to mind. It's kind of like when you're getting a needle. The worst part is not the actual needle part. It's the anticipation of the pain of the needle. And I'm so sorry if that imagery is just like making you shudder, because I despise getting like a shot, like a flu shot or anything. I despise it. But the worst part for me is actually the anticipation. And so I will book it as soon as possible, knowing me, because if I've booked it for like a week away, I will be freaking out for an entire week and not be okay. So that's what I mean from learning from experience. So if there's a goal like that and you know you need to do it immediately, or you're just going to overthink it, just do it immediately. If you know that you will spiral if you give yourself too much time, don't give yourself too much time. So it's kind of like we need to figure out what our weaknesses are and attack it. We need to work around that so that we don't allow ourselves, we don't enable ourselves to continue going down that shame spiral, that overwhelm cycle. Because I actually get very, very easily overwhelmed, and I think that's why I like to break down tasks a lot, because if I don't, I will panic. I will sit there and just panic about everything that needs to be done, and then I don't do it. I very much relate to that. I've done that so many times, and this is why I'm so like fanatic about having journals for everything, because if I don't get it out of my head, I will panic and get overwhelmed and it won't get done. I relate to it so much. So I want you to know you're not alone with it. And I want you to know that there is hope, because again, this is my 15th episode and I still put this off for a whole year. And that's okay. It's okay that it takes you a long time. It's okay if it takes you a whole year, as long as you are making steps towards it. Obviously, ideally, it does not take me a whole year, and the next episode is not going to take me a whole year, and that's learning from experience. So we're going over my tips again. Like, give yourself permission to fail as well, because I think for me as a perfectionist, that's the root of my overthinking, is that I feel like it has to meet a certain standard. It has to be, perfect. Not perfect. We all know there's no such thing as perfect, but, the audio has to be good. The setting has to be good. The lighting has to be good. This is not perfect. The setup is not perfect. There's a lot of things I would change, but I like it and it's good enough. And good enough is good enough, because, wait, there is a quote that the first time I heard it made no sense to me. And then over the years, I realized how wrong I was and how perfect this quote was, because the quote is, done. I forgot the quote. Hang on. Done is better than perfect. And the first time I heard that quote, I was like, that's silly. Perfect is better than done. What do you mean? And then I realized over time what that meant, because then I struggled to even get things out, get things done, because I was so focused on making sure it was perfect. It was good enough. It was tweaked just a little bit more. But sometimes done is better than perfect. And also, in most cases, you will continue to grow, you will continue to create, and you will get better. So it's not only giving yourself permission to fail. Fail is a heavy word, but permission to grow, permission to get better, to learn. That first video on YouTube you put out might not be perfect, but the second one might be better. And then the third one might be worse, but that's okay. The fourth one might be better. And then the fifth one will be so much better than the first. And maybe not, but that's okay because you're giving yourself permission to just experiment, to learn, to get better with time. Not necessarily giving yourself permission to fail, but I think that's an important reality to think about as well, because if you're so terrified of the failure, which is a very, very real problem, I understand that, but just letting yourself sit in that. Let's go through the worst case scenario. You post that video on YouTube and it feels like an absolute nightmare. You're terrified, and lo and behold, it gets 2 views after a week. That sucks, right? Because you've spent a lot of time on it. But then what? You pat yourself on the back for putting it out. You did a great job. Let's move on to the next one. And that's part of the permission to fail, but part of the permission to grow, because I'm sure, as disappointing as it is, your goal was not to post one video on YouTube and go viral and be successful forever. I'm sure that was not your goal. If it is your goal, then, this is not the podcast for you, but I'm sure your goal is to continue to learn, to make better videos, to enjoy the process of putting out videos, to find your people, to have a community, to share your work as an artist. And that's another episode to go into, like, your why and focusing on what's important when it comes to putting your content out there. That's a different video. But I think especially in the beginning, we have such big, lofty, beautiful, big goals that we get so caught up in the pressure of what it will feel like when we've achieved that goal that we forget that we need to start somewhere in order to make any progress on that goal. And so we tend to kind of paralyze ourselves into not doing anything because of how big the goal is, of how big the dream is. So I'm not telling you to forget that dream or forget that goal, but I want you to bring it back to the reality of today. What can you do right now? And what can you do by the end of the week? What can you do by the end of the month? So when you keep your dreams or your goals unbounded, again, bringing it back to the tip of give yourself a deadline. When you keep your dreams unbounded, then you will take forever to do it. Again, I think it's called Parkinson's law, but give yourself a timeline. Give yourself a timeline to do it. It's not so you can punish yourself if you don't get it done in time. It's to help focus your efforts so that you do feel like you have to get something done. It's so that you can be consistent. It's so that you can be focused and not feel like you can put it off for another week, another month, or another year like I did, because you've got all the time in the world. And a bonus tip, which I didn't really talk about, but it's kind of linked to the tip of think of your future self. I don't know the order of the tips anymore because I've just completely changed the order of it. But when you're thinking of your future self, you're also thinking of your why, bringing it back to your why. And I didn't go into this yet, but the whole point I said think of your future self is not so you know how it feels afterwards, but wait, I forgot what I was going to say. Oh, yes. So would you rather go through the pain, face the discomfort, face the uncomfortable reality, and get it done and make progress towards it, or get so overwhelmed that you don't do anything? Again, I know it's easier said than done, but that first step is not as hard as we think. It's not as terrible as our brains have convinced us that it is. And so if you take away one thing from this, it's that I just want you to take that first step. Do what you can to take that first step, because a lot of the times we just need momentum. A lot of the times we just need to get that ball rolling. And once we've done one thing, we have the confidence to do the next task, and then it just keeps going from there. But a lot of the times we get stuck in that initial planning process that we can't even take that first step because we get so overwhelmed. So again, if you take nothing else from this episode, I really just want you to focus on each time just taking that first step. And if you fail after the first step, that's okay. You tried. At least you tried something, rather than just giving up before you do anything. And I don't mean to say this to like pressure you, because I know how difficult it is, and everyone needs different levels of like self-care and kindness. But for me, the way I always see it is I can, be overwhelmed and put things off forever. But the guilt of not doing the thing that I wanted to do, the regret of not doing the thing I wanted to do, is so much worse. in my opinion. Again, linked back to think of your future self. Feeling the regret and the annoyance at not doing something earlier, to me, that feeling is so much worse than the overwhelm of just dealing with it right now. And maybe you will be like me and you'll put things off, you'll just keep putting it off, and you'll eventually get to the point, like I did 2 weeks ago, where I just got so over it. I was so tired of myself, and it's an important goal to me. I know that it was an important goal to me, and I was like, why do you keep putting this off? I was trying to be kind, but I was like, why? At some point, you just need tough love. And I was just like, if this really isn't as important to you as you seem to claim it is, then you need to do something about it, because just putting it off and not making any steps towards it is not getting you anywhere. So that's my eighth bonus tip, to just give yourself some tough love and just pull up your boots, I don't know what the phrase is, and just get it done. Just rip off the band-aid and just do it. If you're at that point now where it's been so long now and you keep putting off this big thing and you're still thinking about it, so clearly it's very important to you, you have to make a decision for yourself. Do I want to keep putting this off for the rest of my life? Or do I want to pull off the band-aid and just do something about it right now? So that is my kind of tough love tip, because at some point, enough is enough. Enough is enough. You've been thinking about it for so long, and you need to decide whether or not it's important enough to take steps towards. Because if it's not, let's reevaluate and move on. Let's change our goals. But if it is that important, then why are you still holding yourself back? Is this really the way you want to live? Is this really the way you want to pursue your goals? Obviously not, if we're going into shame spirals. And this is why it's tricky, because the whole point is not to shame yourself into doing it, but to really build up the confidence and the momentum to be able to do it, to be able to chase your goals. And again, I say all that because I personally struggle with it. I still struggle with it. A lot of things just YouTube's, like, how many videos have I posted on YouTube? How many years have I been doing this? And I still struggle with it. It definitely gets easier, but it's not a feeling that goes away. And I still remember the first time I filmed on camera, like talking like this would have been unheard of 5-6 years ago. I still did it, but I was so much more terrified back then, whereas now I'm a little bit more comfortable talking on camera and just sitting here and talking. But I still make mistakes. I still have to cut things out. I still overshare, and I need to cut that out as well. I stumble over my words. Like, that's okay. Those things will happen. You'll make mistakes, but it's good enough for right now, because right now, like literally right in this moment, I am so happy that I am doing this, because all morning I've been worrying about it. All day yesterday I've been worrying about it. All weekend I've been worrying about this, and it's just, sorry to bring this back again, but it's just like the needle example. The thinking and the worrying about it is so much worse than actually just doing it. And so our minds can be our worst enemies. It's self-sabotage. So we need to develop strategies to get out of our own way. And again, just listening to this might not inspire you to make any real lasting changes, because that's an illusion to think that you can just watch one video and your life changes. Okay, my camera just ran out of battery, so even that is telling me to stop talking. So I'm going to wrap this up. But I just want to cover the root issues in case you haven't really thought about why you're putting something off. So I wrote down, it could be a lack of confidence. We feel like we're not prepared, we're not ready. And so we keep putting it off because we don't feel confident enough to make a start. It kind of links into the next one, which is no trust in our ability. Again, that kind of links back to when I was so afraid of talking on camera that I felt like I wouldn't be able to talk. I didn't trust in my rambling abilities, and so I would write myself a script, even though that went against my natural tendency, my natural speaking style. And so scripts, flashcards, dot points, yes, but even then, I'm not really looking at my notes. I kind of refer back to it to make sure that I've covered everything, but I feel like it's just to make me feel better and get the notes out of my head so I have somewhat of a structure, but it's not something I need to refer to. I do look down and look at my tips. That was kind of important, but it's not something I'm following word for word, like in the first 10 minutes talk about this. But I used to do that because I didn't trust that I would be able to, stick to what I was going to say. And so in the beginning, that's what I struggled with. No trust in my own ability, Fear of failure is a very, very big one. Avoiding discomfort / uncomfortable feelings, kind of self-explanatory. And the last one, which I didn't really touch on, but is a big one, and it needs to be its own episode, comparison trap. So a lot of people can struggle with overthinking and overwhelm because they're comparing themselves to where someone else is at a different part of their journey. So maybe you want to start a YouTube channel, but you're looking at existing YouTube channels and you're like, I could never do that. And so you get overwhelmed by like how big that task seems, and then you never start. But you forget that everyone started somewhere, and not everyone started with a perfectly polished video. My earlier videos definitely does not look like this. My early podcast episode did not look like this either. And so I will do a bit of a deep dive into like comparison traps and, comparing yourself, because that's a really big one that people struggle with that can hold them back. But I guess to make this a little bit more actionable, what I want you to do is just to kind of write it out, to journal about it if you can, and reflect on where you think you're being held back. Where do you think that you're stopping yourself from taking steps towards your goals, and how can you do it differently? How can you break out of that cycle? And so whether that is giving yourself a deadline and being very specific, I'm going to give myself this one weekend to figure out this one thing. And if I need more time, I need more time, but I'm really going to try to just complete it this weekend. Whether that's something as simple as choosing a brand name, choosing a brand color. The point is to not have it perfect, because then you've missed the whole point of this podcast. The point of it is not to have it perfect and that you've got a final decision and that's it. The point is to take the first step so that you can get the ball rolling and build up that momentum to keep going, because we will never learn if we never make progress. The only way we learn is by making mistakes. We have to make progress. We have to take action in order for us to improve on anything. And I wouldn't be here doing this if I didn't take that first step to record that first unplanned podcast episode. If I didn't take that step to record that very first studio vlog. I did not feel ready at all recording that first studio vlog, but it turned out to be the best decision of my life. And so, yeah, it's okay. It's not going to be great. Your first attempt at anything is not going to be great, but you have to start somewhere. And I have a podcast on that, a podcast episode on just starting where you are and starting before you're ready. Because waiting till you feel like you're ready, you're going to be waiting a long time, because truth be told, I don't feel ready for almost anything that I do, because that part of me, that perfectionist part of me, still wants to take 10 times as long to do something. But because I've learned from experience, I know that I need to cut myself off somewhere, and that at some point, action is more beneficial and more productive than just sitting there and thinking about it and planning it out as much as I can. So I hope this episode was helpful for you if you are overthinking it. Hopefully it's just a good place for you to start. And I know that you can get a little initial boost or a little motivation after watching a podcast episode or just watching anything about it. But the trick is to keep it going. If you have to keep watching this video, go for it. But I really want you to take steps. And I really want you to just keep fighting yourself, because we can do this. We just need to get better at managing ourselves and get out of our own way and get out of our own heads, because we are standing in our own ways. This is what this whole podcast is about, getting out of our own ways to stop self-sabotaging and to unlearn really bad habits that we think are protecting us but are really holding us back. So thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you for being a witness to my struggle on this business journey, and I hope I've helped you in some small way. But thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.